Under the vast starlit sky of the Arizona desert, where legends of the Old West still whisper through the wind, something impossible happened. Jake Morrison, a lone cowboy living on the edge of civilization, never believed in anything beyond what his eyes could see until one night a streak of silver light tore across the heavens and crashed into the canyon near his ranch. What he found among the wreckage would shatter everything he thought he knew about the universe. She wasn't from any town, any state, or even any world he'd ever imagined. Her eyes held the depth of galaxies, her presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. In one act of compassion, Jake saved her life. But when morning came, reality itself began to unravel. Strange symbols appeared in his fields, his animals behaved as if possessed, and the government arrived with questions he couldn't answer. What had he brought into his world? And more importantly, what had followed her here? This is the story of a cowboy who saved a beautiful alien and the cosmic mystery that changed his life forever. Jake Morrison had lived alone on the Red Mesa Ranch for 7 years, ever since his wife left him for a life less isolated, less consumed by dust and solitude. At 42 years old, his weathered face told stories of harsh summers and brutal winters, of cattle drives and encounters with rattlesnakes that came too close to his boots. The ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by red rock formations that glowed like fire at sunset and ancient Joshua trees that seemed to reach toward the heavens with gnarled fingers. That October evening started like any other. Jake had just finished mending a section of fence on the eastern pasture when the sky began to change. At first, he thought it was a meteor, a bright streak of silver blue light that cut across the darkness with impossible speed. But meteors don't slow down. They don't change direction. And they certainly don't emit a sound like 1,000 wind chimes singing in harmony. The object descended rapidly, heading straight for Copper Canyon, the deep gorge that marked the southern boundary of his property. The impact shook the ground beneath Jake's feet, sending his horse, Dusty, into a panic. The boom that followed wasn't like thunder or an explosion. It was deeper, resonant, as if the earth itself had struck a massive bell. Jake's instincts told him to stay away, to call the authorities and let them handle whatever had just crashed. But curiosity burned hotter than caution. He grabbed his rifle, mounted Dusty, and rode toward the canyon under the pale light of a crescent moon. The October air was cold, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. But as he approached the crash site, a new smell invaded his senses, something metallic and sweet, like copper mixed with honey. The wreckage lay at the bottom of the canyon, illuminated by a soft, pulsating glow that seemed to emanate from within the craft itself. It wasn't like any aircraft Jake had ever seen. No rivets, no seams, no obvious entrance or windows. The surface looked almost organic, like polished obsidian that shifted colors from deep purple to midnight blue as the light played across it. But what stopped Jake's heart wasn't the ship. It was the figure lying motionless 20 feet from the wreckage. She was humanoid but undeniably not human. Her skin had a faint luminescence, pale as moonlight, with an almost imperceptible shimmer, as if starlight had been woven into her very being. Her hair, if it could be called that, flowed in long silvery strands that seemed to move with a life of their own, floating slightly even though there was no wind. She wore a form-fitting suit that looked like liquid mercury, seamlessly integrated with her body. Jake dismounted and approached cautiously, his rifle raised but his hands trembling. As he got closer, he could see that she was breathing shallow, labored breaths that made her chest rise and fall irregularly. There was a gash on her temple, leaking a substance that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. Her eyes suddenly opened, and Jake nearly dropped his rifle. They were enormous, with irises that swirled like miniature galaxies, deep violets, blues, and flecks of silver that seemed to rotate slowly. She looked at him with an expression that transcended language, fear, pain, and a desperate plea for help, all conveyed in a single glance. "Easy now," Jake heard himself say, his voice rough from surprise. I'm not gonna hurt you. She tried to speak, and sound emerged melodic, like several voices harmonizing at once, each note clear and distinct. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was dying. He made a decision that would change his life forever. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, Jake carefully lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. Her skin was warm to the touch, but not quite in the way human skin was warm. It was like holding something that generated its own gentle heat from within. The ride back to the ranch took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Jake kept looking down at her, watching her labored breathing, seeing the blue luminescence of her wound fade gradually. By the time they reached his small ranch house, he was genuinely afraid she wouldn't make it. He laid her on his bed, the only clean surface he could think of, and began examining her injuries. The gash on her temple was deep, and the blue substance, her blood, he assumed had stopped flowing, but left crystalline traces on her skin that sparkled in the lamplight. He had no idea how to treat an alien, but he did know basic first aid. Jake cleaned the wound gently with water, half expecting her to dissolve or react violently, but she remained still, her breathing gradually becoming more regular. He fashioned a bandage from clean cloth and wrapped it around her head. As he worked, he noticed something extraordinary. Her wound was already beginning to close, the edges of torn skin knitting together at a visible rate. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. Her eyes opened again, focusing on him with startling clarity. She reached up with one delicate hand and touched his cheek. The contact sent a jolt through Jake's body. Not painful, but intense, like touching a live wire made of pure sensation. Images flooded his mind. Vast cities of crystalline towers, 3 suns setting over an ocean of liquid glass, beings like her moving through impossible spaces, and then darkness, pursuit, fear, and the desperate flight that ended here. When she withdrew her hand, Jake staggered back, his mind reeling. She had shown him, not told him, but shown him why she was here. She was running. Something was hunting her. "You're safe now," Jake said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "I'll protect you." She seemed to understand, or perhaps she read his emotions through that strange connection. Her eyes closed again, and this time, she fell into what looked like genuine sleep. Jake spent the rest of the night sitting in his old leather chair beside the bed, rifle across his lap, watching her breathe and wondering what the morning would bring. Outside, the desert returned to its usual silence, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, oblivious to the fact that one of their own had fallen to earth. Dawn broke over Red Mesa Ranch with a peculiar quality to the light, as if the sun itself was shining through a filter Jake couldn't quite identify. He had dozed off sometime around 4 in the morning, and when he woke with a start, his neck stiff from the awkward angle of the chair, the first thing he noticed was that his guest was standing at the window, looking out at his land with an expression of wonder mixed with sorrow. She had healed remarkably overnight. The bandage had fallen away, revealing smooth, unblemished skin where the wound had been. She turned when she heard him stir, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, 2 beings from impossibly different worlds, connected by a single act of compassion. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, standing slowly and immediately feeling foolish. Did she even understand English? To his surprise, she responded, though her voice was still that strange, harmonious chorus of sounds. But this time, words formed in his mind, clear as if she'd spoken directly into his thoughts. "Better. Thank you for saving my life. You risk much for a stranger. Can you read my mind?" Jake asked, uncomfortable with the idea. "Not read. Connect. My people communicate through shared consciousness. I am learning your verbal language from your surface thoughts, but it will take time to speak with my voice rather than my mind." Jake nodded slowly, trying to process this. "What's your name?" She tilted her head, considering. My designation translates poorly to your language. The closest approximation would be ... Lyra. In your mythology, it is a constellation. It seemed appropriate. Lyra, Jake repeated. I'm Jake Morrison. And you're welcome, I suppose. Couldn't just leave you there to die. Yet many of your kind would have. I have studied your species from afar. You are capable of great compassion and great cruelty in equal measure. Before Jake could respond to that unsettling observation, a sound made them both freeze. It was the distant rumble of multiple vehicles, approaching fast. Jake moved to the window and saw a convoy of black SUVs racing down his access road, leaving massive dust plumes in their wake. Damn it, he muttered. Someone must have seen the crash. Probably reported it. Lyra's expression shifted to something like fear. I cannot be discovered. Not yet. Not until I understand what followed me here. What followed you? Jake asked, but there was no time for answers. The vehicles were already pulling into his yard, doors flying open before they'd even come to a complete stop. Men in black tactical gear emerged, carrying weapons that looked far more sophisticated than Jake's old hunting rifle. Behind them came a woman in a crisp suit, her dark hair pulled back severely, her eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses despite the early hour. Jake made a split-second decision. The storm cellar. There's a hidden entrance under the rug in my bedroom. Get down there and don't make a sound no matter what you hear. Lyra hesitated only a moment before moving with inhuman grace toward the bedroom. Jake watched her disappear through the trap door, then kicked the rug back into place and walked out onto his porch trying to look like a man who'd been rudely awakened rather than one hiding an extraterrestrial being in his cellar. This is private property, he called out, letting his hand rest casually near the pistol on his hip. You folks have a warrant? The woman in the suit approached, removing her sunglasses to reveal sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Morrison, I'm Director Sarah Chun with the Department of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification. We're not here to cause you trouble, but we need to ask you some questions about an unidentified aerial phenomenon that crashed on or near your property last night. Don't know what you're talking about, Jake said flatly. Heard something that might have been thunder around midnight, but that's all. Director Chun smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Morrison, we detected an object entering Earth's atmosphere at 2300 hours with a trajectory that terminated within a 5-mile radius of your location. We also have satellite thermal imaging showing you rode out to the crash site and returned approximately 90 minutes later. So let's skip the part where you pretend ignorance and move to the part where you cooperate. Jake felt his jaw tighten. These people were thorough. Went to check on my cattle. Thought the noise might have spooked them. In the middle of the night? In Copper Canyon, which according to our surveys contains no grazing areas. Chan's smile had vanished. Mr. Morrison, this is a matter of national security. If you encountered anything unusual, any debris, any biological material, it's imperative that you tell us immediately. Exposure to extraterrestrial substances can be extremely dangerous. Extraterrestrial? Jake let out a bark of laughter that sounded forced even to his own ears. You're telling me you think actual aliens crashed on my property? That's what your government department wastes money on? John stepped closer, her voice dropping to a tone that was more threat than conversation. Let me be very clear, Mr. Morrison. We have the legal authority to quarantine this entire area and conduct a thorough search of every structure on your property. But I preferred to do this cooperatively. I believe you saw something last night. I believe you may have even found something. And I strongly advise you to share that information with us before this situation escalates beyond your ability to control it. Jake met her gaze steadily. The only thing I found was a coyote den I didn't know was there. Nearly got bit for my trouble. Now, unless you're charging me with something, I'd appreciate it if you get off my land. Director Chun studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But understand this, we'll be monitoring your property. Any unusual activity, any strange readings, and we'll be back with more than polite questions. She turned to her team. Set up a perimeter surveillance. I want sensors every 100 yards around this property. And get me a deep scan of that canyon. As the tactical teams dispersed, Chun paused at her vehicle. Mr. Morrison, if you're protecting something, you should ask yourself whether you're protecting it from us ... or protecting yourself from it. Not everything that falls from the sky has good intentions. The convoy pulled out, but true to her word, several teams remained behind, setting up equipment around his property line. Jake waited until they were out of sight before returning to the house, his heart pounding. He lifted the trapdoor and found Lyra exactly where he'd left her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her own skin in the darkness of the cellar. They're gone, but they're watching, Jake said quietly. You need to tell me what the hell is really going on. What followed you here? Why are you running? Lyra emerged from the cellar, and her expression was grave. My people are called the aliens. We are explorers, scientists, seekers of knowledge across galaxies. But we discovered something we should not have evidence of a species that predates the current universe. They exist between dimensions, feeding on the life force of populated worlds. We call them the Harvesters. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. And they followed you here? Not followed. They are already here. They have been here for a very long time. Hidden, waiting, preparing. My ship detected their presence when I entered your solar system. I tried to warn my people, but my communications were jammed, and I was attacked. I crashed trying to escape their suppression field. So there are more of them? Here? On Earth? Lyra moved to the window, looking out at the landscape with haunted eyes. I detected 3 convergence points places where they are gathering energy for their emergence. Your government may not even know they exist, but they will soon. When the Harvesters fully manifest, they will strip this planet of all its life force in a matter of days. Everything human, animal, plant will be reduced to ash and emptiness. Jake sat down heavily in his chair, trying to process this nightmare scenario. And you're saying this is happening now? Not in 100 years or 1,000 years, but now. Within 48 hours, by my calculations. The convergence is nearly complete. I tried to stop it, but I failed. My ship is damaged, my weapons offline, and I am alone. Lyra turned to him, and for the first time, he saw genuine fear in those galactic eyes. I'm sorry, Jake Morrison. By saving me, you have only ensured that you will be conscious when the end comes. Perhaps it would have been more merciful to let me die. The hell with that, Jake said, standing up with sudden determination. If what you're saying is true, then we don't have time to sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. You said there are 3 convergence points. Where are they? Even if I could show you, what could we do? I am one damaged alien, and you are one human with primitive weapons. Jake grabbed his rifle and checked the load, then looked at her with a grim smile. Lady, I've spent 7 years alone on this ranch with nothing but coyotes and rattlesnakes for company. I've survived droughts that killed my neighbors' herds, sandstorms that stripped paint off metal, and a wife who said she couldn't love a man who loved the desert more than her. If you think I am going to just sit here and wait for some interdimensional monsters to suck the life out of my planet, you don't know much about cowboys. Now where's the nearest convergence point? Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then something like hope flickered across her features. 17 miles northeast. An abandoned mine called Black Rock. But Jake, you must understand. I understand just fine, Jake interrupted. I understand that sometimes you have to ride into the storm instead of running from it. Now, can that fancy ship of yours be repaired? Perhaps partially, but the parts I need, we'll figure it out. One problem at a time. Jake grabbed his coat and his ammunition. First, we scout this black rock place and see what we're up against. Then we'll worry about fixing your ship. And if those government folks get in our way, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." As they prepared to leave, Jake caught his reflection in the window and had to shake his head at the absurdity of it all. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern was whether he had enough hay to get through winter. Now, he was planning to fight interdimensional aliens alongside a beautiful extraterrestrial woman who glowed in the dark. Sometimes, he thought, the universe has a hell of a sense of humor. The ride to Black Rock Mine was tense and silent, with Lyra hidden under a tarp in the bed of Jake's old pickup truck to avoid any satellite surveillance. The government teams were still setting up their perimeter equipment, giving Jake a narrow window to slip away unnoticed. The desert landscape rolled by in shades of rust and gold as the morning sun climbed higher, but Jake barely noticed the beauty he'd lived with all his life. His mind was too busy processing the impossible situation he'd found himself in. When they were far enough from the ranch, Lyra emerged from her hiding spot and sat beside him in the cab. She had wrapped herself in one of Jake's old flannel shirts and a pair of his jeans, which looked absurdly baggy on her slender frame, but at least made her appear somewhat human from a distance. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap, though it still seemed to shimmer with that otherworldly quality. "Tell me more about these harvesters," Jake said, his eyes on the rough desert road ahead. "If we're going up against them, I need to know what they can do." Lyra was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "They exist primarily in a higher dimension, what you might call the space between spaces. In our dimension, they appear as shadows at first darkness that moves with intention. As they gather energy, they become more substantial, more real. In their full manifestation, they are massive entities of pure hunger, capable of draining the life force from anything organic within a radius of several miles. How do you kill them? That is the question my people have struggled with for generations. They cannot be killed in the traditional sense because they are not truly alive as you or I understand life. They exist in a state between being and not being. But they can be disrupted, forced back into their dimensional prison, if the convergence points are destabilized before they fully manifest. And how do we do that? Each convergence point is anchored by a resonance device, something the harvesters left behind eons ago, hidden in places of geological significance. These devices vibrate at a frequency that thins the barrier between dimensions. My ship's scanners detected the signature. We must find the device and destroy it, or at minimum, alter its frequency enough to break the convergence pattern. Jake nodded grimly. And I'm guessing these devices are well protected? The harvesters will have created guardians beings pulled from your planet's own life forms, but twisted, corrupted. They will defend the convergence points with absolute ferocity. Of course they will, Jake muttered. Nothing's ever simple. They reached Black Rock Mine 40 minutes later. The place had been abandoned since the 1950s, when the last of the copper ore ran out and the mining company went bankrupt. All that remained were a few collapsed structures, rusted equipment, and the mine entrance itself, a dark tunnel that burrowed into the side of a rocky hill like a wound in the earth. Jake parked a quarter-mile away, and they approached on foot, using the natural cover of boulders and scrub brush. As they got closer, Jake noticed something was wrong. The air felt thick, oppressive, and there was a smell like ozone mixed with decay. Lyra grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "The dimensional barrier is very thin here. We must be extremely careful." They crept closer to the mine entrance, and that's when Jake saw them, the guardians Lyra had warned about. There were 3 of them, and they had once been coyotes, but not anymore. They were larger now, easily the size of wolves, and their fur had taken on a black, oily quality that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed with a sickly yellow radiance, and when they moved, It was with an unnatural, jerking motion, as if they were puppets being controlled by inexpert hands. "Christ," Jake breathed, raising his rifle. "Wait," Lyra said. "Do not fire unless necessary. The sound will alert others." But the corrupted coyotes had already sensed their presence. All three heads snapped toward them in unison, and they began to move forward with increasing speed, their movements becoming more coordinated, more purposeful. Jake didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, the rifle reports echoing across the desert. The first shot took the lead coyote in the chest, and it went down, but then it got back up, the bullet wound leaking black ichor instead of blood. The second and third shots had similar effects. The creatures could be heard, but they weren't staying down. "Run!" Lyra shouted, and they sprinted toward a cluster of boulders, the corrupted animals close behind. Jake could hear their claws scraping against rock, hear the wet, gurgling sounds they made that were nothing like any coyote he'd ever encountered. They reached the boulders and pressed themselves into a narrow gap between 2 massive rocks. The creatures paced outside, their yellow eyes searching, their movements becoming more agitated. Jake reloaded his rifle, knowing it would do little good. "I thought you said we had 48 hours before they fully manifested," Jake said, breathing hard. "These are early-stage guardians," Lyra replied. "Once the harvesters fully emerge, they will be far more dangerous. But you are right, the convergence is accelerating. It may be happening faster than my calculations suggested." One of the creatures suddenly lunged at their hiding spot, its jaws snapping inches from Jake's face. He shoved the rifle barrel into its mouth and fired, and this time, the creature's head exploded in a shower of black gore. It finally stayed down. The other 2 backed away, circling, more cautious now. Laura closed her eyes, and her skin began to glow brighter. The air around her seemed to shimmer and pulse. When she opened her eyes again, they were blazing with light. She stepped out from the rocks, and before Jake could stop her, she raised her hands toward the remaining creatures. A pulse of energy erupted from her palms, not visible as light exactly, but as a distortion in space itself, like heat waves on summer asphalt. The energy struck the corrupted coyotes, and they were lifted off their feet and thrown backward with tremendous force. They hit the ground hard, and this time they didn't get up. The black corruption seemed to evaporate from their bodies, leaving behind what looked like normal coyotes again, though clearly dead. Lyra swayed, and Jake caught her before she fell. She was breathing heavily, and her glow had dimmed significantly. That took more energy than I anticipated. My reserves are still depleted from the crash. Can you walk? Jake asked. Yes, but we must hurry. That energy discharge will have alerted anything else in the area. They moved quickly toward the mine entrance, and as they entered the darkness, Jake pulled out his flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating walls of rough-hewn rock and rotting timber supports. The smell of decay was stronger here, and something else, that strange ozone scent, was overwhelming now. They descended into the mine, following the main shaft as it sloped downward. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Jake could see his breath forming small clouds in the flashlight beam. Lyra moved beside him, her faint glow providing additional light, and Jake noticed that symbols were beginning to appear on the wall's geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when he looked at them directly. "The resonance device is close," Lyra whispered. "Can you hear it?" Jake stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing and the distant drip of water. But then he heard it, a low humming sound, almost below the threshold of hearing. But once he noticed it, it seemed to fill his entire head. It was a sound that made his teeth ache and his bones vibrate. They rounded a corner and found themselves in a larger chamber, and there, in the center, was the device. It was approximately 3 feet tall, composed of a black metallic substance that Jake didn't recognize. with geometric shapes that interlocked in ways that seemed physically impossible. It pulsed with a soft purple light in rhythm with that terrible humming sound, and the air around it was distorted, like looking through water. But they weren't alone. Standing between them and the device was a figure, and for a moment, Jake thought it was human. It was roughly the right size and shape, dressed in what looked like old mining clothes. But as his flashlight beam hit it, the figure turned, and Jake saw that its face was wrong, features that shifted and blurred, eyes that were hollow voids, a mouth that opened too wide and contained only darkness. "Harvester Scout," Lyra said, her voice tight with fear. "They have manifested a corporeal form already. This is worse than I thought." The figure's mouth moved, and sound emerged. But it wasn't words exactly. It was the sound of grinding metal and breaking glass. The sound of screaming that had been going on for so long it had lost all meaning. The sound crashed over Jake like a physical force, and he felt his knees buckle. Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised, her entire body beginning to glow with that beautiful, terrible light. "Get back!" She shouted at Jake. "I will hold it off. You must destroy the device." "How?" Jake gasped, fighting against the paralysis that sound was causing. "Shoot it. The device is stabilized by internal resonance crystals. Enough kinetic force should shatter them." The scout form began to move toward them, its motion stuttering and unnatural, leaving trails of shadow in the air behind it. Lyra unleashed another pulse of energy, and the creature staggered but didn't stop. She hit it again and again, each blast taking more out of her. Jake could see her light dimming with each attack. He forced himself to move, to step past the creature and Lyra's desperate defense. He raised his rifle and aimed at the device, praying that this would work. He fired once, twice, 3 times, the reports deafening in the enclosed space. The bullets struck the black metal, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, cracks appeared, spiderwebbing across the surface of the device. The purple light began to flicker. The humming sound rose to a shriek, and suddenly, the device exploded in a blast of purple energy that threw both Jake and Lyra off their feet. When Jake's vision cleared, he saw that the scout form was gone, evaporated as if it had never existed. The device was in pieces, the black metal now dull and lifeless. Lyra was on the ground beside him, barely conscious, her glow almost completely faded. "We did it," she whispered. "One convergence point disrupted." "Yeah," Jake said, helping her to her feet. "But you said there were 3. And we almost died dealing with just one." They made their way back through the mine shaft, supporting each other, both of them battered and exhausted. When they emerged into the sunlight, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing by his truck were Director Chun and 6 heavily armed agents, their weapons trained on him and Lyra. "Mr. Morrison," Chun said coldly, "I think it's time we had that cooperation conversation again. And this time, I'd like to include your friend." The confrontation at Black Rock Mine could have gone violently wrong in an instant, but Director Chun surprised Jake by not immediately opening fire. Her agents kept their weapons trained on him and Lyra, but Chun herself seemed more curious than aggressive. Her eyes moved between Jake's battered appearance and Lyra's obviously non-human features with the clinical assessment of a scientist encountering a fascinating new specimen. "Lower your weapons," Chun ordered her team, though they hesitated before complying. She took a step closer, her gaze fixed on Lyra. "You're actually real." After 40 years of investigating UFO sightings and chasing shadows, we finally have confirmation of extraterrestrial life. But you look terrified, and Mr. Morrison looks like he's been through hell. That suggests you're not the threat we need to worry about, are you? Lyra straightened despite her exhaustion, meeting Chun's gaze with dignity. "I am Lyra of Alea. I came to your world to warn you, but I was attacked and crashed. This man saved my life when he could have left me to die. If you arrest him or harm him, you will lose your planet's only chance at survival. Chun's eyebrows rose. Strong words. Survival from what, exactly? There isn't time for a full explanation, Jake interjected. But the short version is that something's been hiding on Earth for a long time, waiting to wake up and drain all the life from this planet. We just destroyed one of 3 anchor points, keeping them dormant. We have 2 more to deal with, and less than 2 days to do it. Chan studied them both, and Jake could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She was a true professional assessing the situation, weighing the evidence of what she'd seen against the impossibility of what she was being told. Finally, she made a decision. Show me the mine. 15 minutes later, Chun and 2 of her agents emerged from the shaft, their faces pale. Whatever readings their equipment had picked up, whatever they'd seen of the destroyed resonance device and the lingering dimensional distortions, it had been enough to convince her. When she returned to where Jake and Lyra waited, her entire demeanor had changed. We detected exotic energy signatures from this location last night, but attributed them to your ship's crash, Chun said, her voice tight. Now our instruments are going haywire. Space-time readings that shouldn't be possible. Radiation that doesn't match any known isotope. And something else of presence, almost like a sound but not a sound. That made all of us want to run screaming from that mine. She looked at Lyra. You said there are 2 more locations like this? Lyra nodded. The convergence points form a triangle. The second is approximately 200 miles southwest, beneath what you call the Sonoran Desert. The third is in the mountains to the north, where geothermal activity is highest. Chun pulled out a tablet and began marking locations. We're talking about the Painted Desert Badlands and somewhere near Flagstaff. Both remote areas, but the Flagstaff location is problematic. It's near a populated area. She looked up. If what you're telling me is true, we need to mobilize resources immediately. I can have tactical teams at both locations within hours. No, Lyra said firmly. Your conventional weapons will be useless against the harvesters once they fully manifest. Worse, a large military presence might accelerate the convergence. They feed on fear and aggression. Send your armies, and you'll only make them stronger. Then what do you propose? That we let a lone cowboy and an injured alien handle a planet-ending threat? Jake spoke up. Her ship. She said it might be repairable. If we can get it operational, even partially, we'll have access to weapons that can actually hurt these things. Chun considered this. The crash site is under quarantine. We have teams analyzing the wreckage now. If we're going to attempt repairs, we'll need your cooperation, she said to Lyra. My scientists don't understand the technology. I will help, Lyra agreed. But we must hurry. I can feel the dimensional barriers weakening. The remaining convergence points are pulling at each other, accelerating the process. We may have less time than I initially calculated. Chun made a series of rapid phone calls, and within 20 minutes, a helicopter was landing nearby, kicking up massive clouds of dust. The flight back to Jake's ranch took only 10 minutes, and when they arrived, the entire property had been transformed into a military staging ground. Temporary structures had been erected, satellite dishes pointed at the sky, and dozens of personnel in hazmat suits were examining Lyra's crashed vessel, which had been partially excavated from the canyon. The ship looked even more beautiful and terrible in daylight. Its hull seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of observation, and despite the damage from the crash, it maintained an elegance of design that made human aircraft look crude by comparison. There was a large breach in the aft section, and scorch marks suggested it had taken weapons fire before crashing. Lyra approached her ship with visible emotion, running her hands along its surface. The metal responded to her touch, rippling and reshaping slightly. But the navigation system is destroyed, and the primary weapon array is offline. However, the secondary systems might still function if I can reroute power. Tell us what you need, Chun said, her tablet ready. For the next 6 hours, Lyra directed a repair effort that combined alien technology with human improvisation. She instructed Chen-S engineers to fabricate components based on Earth materials that could interface with her ship's systems, explaining concepts of dimensional physics and quantum entanglement that left the scientists struggling to keep up. Jake, despite his lack of technical knowledge, found himself surprisingly useful as a translator of sorts. Lyra's explanations were often too abstract for the engineers, and he had developed enough of a connection with her to bridge the conceptual gap. As they worked, Jake noticed something unsettling. The sky had taken on a strange quality. The blue seemed deeper, almost purple at the edges, and the clouds moved in patterns that weren't quite natural. Animals were behaving strangely too. Birds had stopped singing entirely, and the few jackrabbits he saw were moving in circles, as if confused. "It's beginning," Lyra said quietly, noticing his observation. "The dimensional barriers are thinning everywhere. Soon, reality itself will start to feel unstable." By early evening, they had achieved something remarkable. The ship's secondary weapon system was online, a directed energy cannon that could fire pulses similar to what Lyra had used against the corrupted coyotes, but orders of magnitude more powerful. The navigation was still dead, but they had managed to jury-rig a human helicopter engine to provide lift capability, creating a hybrid vehicle that was equal parts alien spacecraft and human engineering ingenuity. "It's not elegant, but it should fly," one of Chun's engineers said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Though I'll be damned if I understand half of how it works." Chun gathered her core team, spreading maps across a makeshift table. "We need to hit both remaining convergence points simultaneously. If we take them one at a time, there's a risk the remaining point will accelerate its manifestation to compensate." "Lyra, which target is more critical?" Lyra studied the maps, her finger tracing invisible lines between the points. "The northern location, near your volcanic region. It's the apex of the triangle, the primary anchor point. If we destroy it first, the southern point will destabilize on its own. But the northern site will be the most heavily defended. The harvesters will concentrate there, guardians there. Then that's where we focus on main assault," Chun decided. "I'll coordinate a secondary team for the southern site as a backup measure." She looked at Jake. "Mr. Morrison, I think you've already done more than anyone could ask." "We can handle it from here." Jake shook his head. "No offense, Director, but your people are brave and well-trained, but they don't know what they're up against. I've seen these things up close. I've felt what they can do. And besides," he glanced at Lyra, "I made a promise to see this through." Chun looked like she might argue, but Lyra spoke first. "He should come. We have ... connection. It makes me stronger, more focused. I cannot explain it fully, but his presence provides an anchor to this reality that helps me resist the Harvester's dimensional distortions." "A connection?" Chun's eyebrows rose. "Are we talking about some kind of psychic bond?" Lyra hesitated. "When I touched him to share my memories, something unexpected happened. His consciousness is remarkably resilient, adaptable. Most beings cannot withstand direct mental contact with an alien without suffering trauma, but he absorbed the connection and reflected it back. In a sense, we are now ... linked." Jake felt his face heat up. "You didn't mention that part before. I did not want to alarm you. But it is why you can understand my thoughts so clearly now, why you sometimes know what I'm about to say before I say it. Our minds have become partially entangled." Chun looked between them with an expression that suggested she was filing this information away for later study. "Fine. You're both in the assault team. We move out in 3 hours. Get some rest if you can. It's going to be a long night." Jake led Lyra back to his house, away from the bustle of activity. Inside, the familiar space felt strange now, as if the house belonged to a different life entirely. He made coffee, and they sat in silence for a while, both exhausted but too wired to sleep. "I'm sorry," Lyra said finally. I brought this catastrophe to your world. If I had been stronger, faster, I might have stopped the harvesters before they could establish their convergence. From what you told me, they've been here for a long time. This was happening with or without you. At least now we have a chance to fight back. Jake took a sip of coffee, then asked a question that had been nagging at him. This connection between us, is it permanent? I do not know. It is unprecedented in my experience. When we survive this, when the threat is ended, perhaps it will fade naturally. Or perhaps we will always share this bond. She looked at him with those galaxy eyes. Does it disturb you? Jake thought about it honestly. 24 hours ago, he would have said yes, absolutely. But now, no. He said, it's strange, but I don't mind it. Kind of nice, actually, not being completely alone in my own head after so many years of solitude. Lyra smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face into something radiant. Thank you, Jake Morrison, for saving me, for believing me, for standing with me against the darkness. You are a good man. Just a cowboy who was in the right place at the wrong time, Jake said, feeling embarrassed by the praise. Or maybe the wrong place at the right time. I'm still not sure which. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. One of Chun's agents stood outside, her face grim. You need to see this, now. They followed her to the communications center, where multiple screens showed news feeds from around the world. Every channel was reporting the same strange phenomena occurring simultaneously across the globe. The sky turning purple. Animals behaving erratically. People experiencing shared nightmares of darkness and hunger. And in 3 specific locations, massive sinkholes had appeared, with witnesses reporting seeing something moving in the depths, something vast and terrible. It's happening faster than we thought, Chun said, her voice tight with controlled panic. The convergence is accelerating. We're getting reports of people near those sinkholes losing consciousness, some kind of energy drain. Hospitals are being overwhelmed. Lyra's face had gone pale. They are feeding already, even before full manifestation. This is very bad. We must move immediately, or it will be too late. Chun didn't hesitate. All teams were moving out now. I want everyone in the air in 15 minutes. This is no longer a covert operation. This is a fight for survival. The compound erupted into controlled chaos as personnel scrambled to their positions. Jake checked his rifle one more time, knowing it was probably useless, but finding comfort in the familiar weight. Lyra stood beside him, her body beginning to glow with that inner light as she gathered her strength for the battle ahead. Jake, she said quietly, and he felt her voice in his mind as much as he heard it with his ears. If I do not survive this, don't, he interrupted. We're both getting through this. I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away now. She touched his hand, and he felt warmth flow through him, not just physical warmth, but something deeper, a sense of connection and shared purpose that transcended words. Then let us finish what we started. Let us send the harvesters back to the darkness where they belong. They boarded the modified ship along with Chun and a team of 6 elite operators. The hybrid engines roared to life, human technology and alien science working in imperfect harmony. As they lifted off into the purple-tinged sky, Jake looked down at his ranch, wondering if he would ever see it again. The flight north took 45 minutes at maximum speed, and with every passing mile, the sky grew stranger. Lightning flickered between clouds that moved in spiraling patterns. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy that made the ship's instruments go haywire. And in the distance, they could see a massive sinkhole in the mountains, easily half a mile across, with purple light emanating from its depths like a malevolent eye staring up at the sky. Dear God, Chun whispered. What have we done to deserve this? Nothing, Lyra said. That is what makes the harvesters so terrible. They do not punish or judge. They simply consume. To them, Your entire species is nothing more than fuel for their hunger. As they approached the convergence point, they saw that it was already heavily defended. Corrupted animals of all kinds circled the sinkhole bears, wolves, mountain lions, even birds that dive-bombed anything that came close. And in the center, barely visible through the distorted air, was the resonance device much larger than the one at Black Rock Mine, pulsing with that terrible purple light. But that wasn't the worst of it. Rising from the sinkhole were shapes not quite corporeal, not quite shadow, but something in between. The harvesters themselves were beginning to manifest, and the sight of them made Jake's mind want to shut down entirely. They were massive, easily 100 feet tall, with forms that hurt to look at because they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could properly perceive. Where they moved, reality itself seemed to tear and warp. "They're early," Lyra gasped. "The manifestation should not be this advanced yet. Something has accelerated the process." Chen was already on the radio, coordinating with her other teams. "Southern side is even worse. They're reporting full manifestation there. It's draining everything within a 5-mile radius. Civilian casualties are mounting. Then we hit this one with everything we have," Jake said. "Lyra, can your ship's weapon hurt those things?" "The directed energy might disrupt their dimensional anchoring, but to truly stop them, we must destroy the resonance device. And to reach it, someone will have to get through their guardians and get close enough to plant an explosive charge." They all looked at each other, and the unspoken question hung in the air. Who would take that suicide mission? Jake stood up, checking his rifle. "I'll do it. I've gotten this far. Might as well finish the job." "Absolutely not," Chen said. "You're not trained for. Neither are your people, not for this. I've faced these things twice now and survived. And I have something your soldiers don't." He looked at Lyra. "I have her in my head, guiding me." "That's gotta count for something." Lyra's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded slowly. "I will guide you every step. Through our connection, I can see what you see, warn you of dangers." "But Jake, the energy drain near the device will be intense. You may not make it back." "Yeah, well," Jake said with a grim smile, "I've had a good run." "Time to make it count for something."